What dark secret has been hiding in plain sight in your child's lunchbox? For decades, a silent epidemic has been sweeping across America, leaving our children sicker than ever before, and no one has been connecting the dots until now. A shocking statistic from the 1960s compared to today reveals a health catastrophe so severe that it's compromising our national security. The culprit, something colorful and seemingly innocent that major corporations have been sneaking into nearly everything your family consumes. And right now, we will reveal the bombshell FDA announcement that food industry giants fought desperately to prevent. What they've been putting in your food and why other countries banned it years ago, my friends, the truth is about to stun you. Now let's talk about something else that is hitting home, literally, the stuff you use every day, your cleaning supplies, your kitchen goods, your family essentials. Where are they coming from? Well, too often it's overseas manufacturers cutting corners using questionable chemicals and leaving you wondering if they're safe. But here is the good news. You've got a better option right here in the good old US of A. American-made products from a trusted online manufacturer are changing the game. They're not just any products. They are non-toxic, built with care, and classified as one of the most trusted brands in the country. Go to patriotswitchnn.com. It's linked below to register and to find out more. Space is limited, though. All right, my friends, yes, the die has been cast. Here is the cover of the New York Post as Caroline Leavitt making the big announcement. Great day for Maha moms everywhere. Thank you, Secretary Kennedy, for taking monumental steps to create a healthier country for our children. The die is cast. Oh, yeah. So what is going on? Well, we have the truth that you need to know about. Your children's food finally being addressed. The FDA taking historic action against petroleum-based dyes linked to serious health issues. This could be the biggest food safety revolution in decades. RFK leading the charge. So Americans die earlier than Canadians, Germans, Italians, Japanese, and it wasn't always this way until the 1990s. Our life expectancy was better. Then came toxic chemicals in our food supply, and Americans got sicker. Check this out.
Or this is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way until the early 1990s. Our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen? A big part of it is our diet. Restaurants that serve contaminated food are fined or shut down. But when it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Cap'n Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then a British chemist figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now. We've known.
Yeah, think about that. That's what they've been putting in your food. Here's a shocking fact. In the early 1960s, 3% of American kids had chronic disease. Today, an alarming 60%. Here's more from RFK Jr.
And these are, when my uncle was president, 3% of American kids had chronic disease. Today, it's around 60%. And these are a broad category, the ones that Marty mentioned, like ADHD, the neurological disorders, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, and autism. All of these are injuries that I never heard of when I was a kid. They were not part of the nomenclature. They weren't part of the dialogue. There was zero spent in this country treating chronic disease when my uncle was president. Today, it's about $1.8 trillion annually. It's bankrupting our nation. 74% of American kids cannot qualify for military service. How are we going to maintain our global leadership?
Think about that. That's the national security emergency. These petroleum-based food dyes have been linked to obesity, diabetes, attention deficit disorder, and hormone disruption, with epidemics of these conditions surging with no explanation. We're finally erring on the side of safety. These are petroleum-based chemicals in your food. Here's more.
All of these, well, these dyes have been associated with obesity and diabetes. They've been associated with attention deficit disorder, hormone disruption. And as a doctor, I think of it this way. When we've got an surging epidemic of all of these chronic conditions and no good explanation as to why, don't we want to err on the side of safety?
Absolutely.
These are petroleum-based chemicals. Nobody would think it's reasonable to do a randomized trial where you inject half the kids in the trial with crude oil to see whether or not it's good for you.
Oh, goodness, why would you do that? The F in FDA stands for food. Cancer and diabetes in young people going up at an alarming rate. Let's keep going.
The child chronic. The F in FDA stands for food. Now, there's no one ingredient that accounts for the child chronic disease epidemic. And let's be honest, taking petroleum-based food dyes out of the food supply is not a silver bullet that will instantly make America's children healthy. But it is one important step. This administration is not interested in continuing down the path of doing the same old things as we watch our nation's children get sicker. We need fresh, new approaches. Cancer and diabetes in young people is going up at an alarming rate, and nobody seems to know why. We have to turn our attention to underlying causes, such as chemicals and toxins that children are exposed to, not just more insulin and chemotherapy. And let's not forget that the best way to lower drug prices is to stop taking drugs we don't need.
There's a thought. Time to make the country healthy again. The press secretary laying it out.
That nominated him. Look, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the president nominated him because he trusts him to make this country healthy again. It's not just a slogan, it really is a movement that has broken ground across the country. There's millions of people who believe in RFK Jr., Secretary Kennedy, and what he's doing. I don't want to get ahead of HHS with this historic announcement later and the details of it, but obviously the Secretary feels that he has reason and evidence to announce the ban on artificial dyes later, and I'll let him speak to that this afternoon. Phil. Look,
ban on artificial dyes. Here's more from RFK Jr. If they want to add petroleum, they ought to add it themselves at home. The corporate food giants are scrambling.
And when I met with, and I want to commend the food companies for working with us to achieve this agreement or this settlement. And when I went in a few months or about a month ago to meet with a few food companies, I was talking with my staff about these petroleum-based dyes, and I said if they want to add petroleum, if they want to eat petroleum, they ought to add it themselves at home. But they shouldn't be feeding it to the rest of us. And without our knowledge or consent. And unfortunately, we're going to get rid of the dyes, and then one by one, we're going to get rid of every ingredient and additive in food that we can legally address. When I met,
for the last 50 years, American children have increasingly been living in a toxic soup of synthetic chemicals. My goodness.
American children. Today, the FDA is taking action to remove petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply and from medications. For the last 50 years, American children have increasingly been living in a toxic soup of synthetic chemicals. The scientific community has conducted a number of studies raising concerns about the correlation between petroleum-based synthetic dyes and several health conditions, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, cancer, genomic disruption, GI issues, as I've seen in the hospital, and allergic reactions. For example, this Lancet study conducted a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled study on food dyes and concluded that artificial colors in the diet, quote, result in increased hyperactivity. So why are we taking a gamble?
Yeah, that's all over. Eliminating petroleum-based food dyes, including red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, green 3 by next year.
Petroleum-based. Today, the FDA is taking the following steps. Number one, establishing a national standard and timeline for the food industry to transition from petroleum-based food dyes to natural alternatives. Number two, initiating a process to revoke authorization of synthetic food colorings, including those not in production, namely citrus red number 2 and orange B, within the coming weeks. Number three, taking steps to eliminate the remaining 6 synthetic dyes on the market from the U.S. food supply, specifically red dye number 40, yellow dye number 5, yellow dye number 6, blue dye number 1, blue dye number 2, and green dye number 3 by the end of next year. We are also requesting food companies to remove red dye number 3 sooner than the 2027-2028 deadline previously announced. These steps that we are taking means that the FDA is effectively removing all petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply. For companies that are currently using petroleum-based red dye, try watermelon juice. Or beet juice. For companies currently combining petroleum-based yellow chemical and red dyes together, try carrot juice. The FDA is also announcing plans today to authorize 4 additional natural color additives using natural ingredients in the coming weeks, while also accelerating the review and approval of other natural ingredient colors. Today, the FDA is taking the...
And you know what's wild about this is that a lot of these manufacturers are already using those to color food products. And they're sending them to Canada, they're sending them to Europe. But here we get the privilege of eating the poison from the petroleum-based dyes. So they've already got the mechanism in place. So why have they not used those materials before? Because it's clearly cheaper. Clearly cheaper. Let's keep going. The food our kids are eating today is not really food. It's food-like substances made in petroleum refineries. Oh, here we go. Yeah, if you buy Fruit Loops in Canada, it's made with vegetable dyes. Here is RFK Jr. with Jesse Waters.
Now, Gutfeld made a point on the 5 today. He said, when I was growing up, I ate Fruit Loops for breakfast every day, and I turned out just fine. Now, I would argue he turned out like a maniac. He's hyperactive and deranged, but does he have a point? What are these food dyes actually doing to kids especially?
Yeah, well, if you look at the ingredients for Fruit Loops 20 years ago, it was very, very different than it is today. And today we use chemicals in Fruit Loops that are banned in virtually every country in the world. So if you buy Fruit Loops today in Canada, it is made with vegetable dyes. If you buy it here in the United States, it's made with petroleum synthetics. And as I said in that clip, nobody wants to eat petroleum. So when we went to meet with the food companies, I said to my staff, you know, if they want to eat petroleum, they should put it in their food themselves at home. They shouldn't be feeding it to Americans who, without their knowledge, without their consent. And today we announced that we're going to get it out of the food. So there are 9 dyes, Jesse. 2 of them we're going to ban immediately, orange bee and red dye 2. We're going to accelerate the removal of red dye 3, so we're going to bring it down to under a year. And the other 6 dyes, within 18 months, we hope to get them out of all the food. And that's just the beginning. I mean, one of the problems is that the science about these additives has been systematically suppressed for 30 years because the industry has been running this agency. And we're getting rid of all of those conflicts. We've gotten rid of most of them. And we're going to do real science. And we're going to do science precisely on the issues that Americans care about, making sure their kids are getting food that isn't poison. The food our kids are eating today is not really food. It's food-like substances. And some of it was made in petroleum refineries. And we need to give our kids real food again.
Now,
This is how we reclaim our health. These changes will lead to fewer sick days, better focus, less anxiety, improved learning for our kids, weight loss, more energy, and longer lives. It's about the future of our nation's health. Follow Next News on X for the latest. So what we revealed right now about the petroleum-based dyes in your food is not just disturbing, it's potentially criminal. While 60% of American children now suffer from chronic disease, the FDA has finally taken action to ban these toxic chemicals from our food supply. It's not conspiracy, it's chemistry. So the question is, why did it take so long? Who benefited from keeping these petroleum byproducts in your children's cereals and snacks and drinks while rates of ADHD, obesity, and diabetes skyrocketed? The transformation from 3% childhood chronic disease in the 60s to 60% today represents nothing short of a national health catastrophe. So we must ask, what other toxins are still hiding in our food supply? And could this be merely the tip of the toxic iceberg that's been deliberately concealed for decades? Your children's future depends on these answers. Visit shop.nextnewsnetwork.com, linked down below, to support this revolution.